A ruthless biker kicked a man's dog in front of an entire cafe expecting no consequences until the owner stood up and changed his life forever. The scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the air, mingling with the faint aroma of toasted bread and butter. The morning rush had already slowed, leaving the cafe in a peaceful lull, just the occasional clink of ceramic mugs and the low murmur of conversations. Damon Mercer sat at his usual spot, a quiet corner by the window where he could watch the world go by without being in the middle of it. His coffee was black. No sugar. No cream. The way he liked it. A half-read newspaper lay on the table. Though he wasn't really reading, just scanning. Keeping his mind occupied at his feet. Jax stretched lazily, the sunlight catching the sleek black and tan of his coat. The dog's ears twitched at the distant sounds of the street, but he stayed relaxed. Damon reached down, running a hand over Jack's back, a small gesture unspoken but one that carried years of trust for Damon. Moments like this were rare. A simple morning, no chaos, no noise, just quiet. And after years in the field, he had learned to appreciate the quiet. But it never lasted long. The first sign of trouble came as a low rumble in the distance. At first it blended in with the usual city sounds, the occasional truck passing the hum of conversation. But then it grew louder, heavier, until it became impossible to ignore a motorcycle. Damon didn't look up right away, but Jax did. His ears perked. His body tensed slightly, not fear, just awareness. A trained response, then came the screech tires biting pavement. The kind of stop that wasn't careful or considerate, but aggressive, territorial. A moment later, the door to the cafe swung open with a force that rattled the bell above it. Damon looked up. The man was big, broad shoulders, thick arms covered in ink that stretched from his wrists to his neck. His leather vest was worn patched with insignias. Damon didn't bother trying to decipher the boots. Scuffed heavy hit the tile floor with weight behind each step. The man took in the cafe with a glance as if expecting someone to react. No one did. Most people kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact. Damon didn't look away. Jack stayed still, but his body was coiled. Eyes locked onto the stranger with quiet discipline. The biker's gaze landed on him, then on Jack's. Something flickered in his expression, disdain, maybe amusement. Damon had seen that look before. The man smoked. "You bring that thing in here." Damon didn't answer right away. He lifted his coffee, took a slow sip. His expression didn't change, didn't give the man anything to latch onto. Jax didn't move. The biker let out a short laugh. "Shouldn't be letting a dog lay around. Someone might trip." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, but no one responded. The cafe stayed silent. Damon finally set his cup down. He exhaled slow and steady, not because he was rattled, but because he knew how this kind of thing played out. He had spent years reading people, spotting trouble before it started, and trouble had just walked in. But Damon didn't move, not yet, because he knew something the biker didn't. The quiet wasn't a sign of hesitation. It was the calm before the storm. The biker's smirk lingered as he stepped toward the counter, boots clunking against the tile. The cafe staff moved a little quicker now, their polite smile, stiff eyes darting toward Damon as if he might be the one to defuse whatever was coming. Damon didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched. Jax, on the other hand, was watching, too silent still, but attentive. His eyes tracked the man's every movement, his ears flicking forward like a soldier awaiting orders. The biker ordered a coffee. Black, no sugar, no cream. Damon almost smirked at the irony. The cashier's hands shook as she handed him the cup. He snatched it, took a sip. Grimace, too weak. He muttered, tossing it into the trash without another glance. Then instead of leaving, he turned back toward the cafe, rolling his shoulders like a man who had nothing better to do than pick a fight. His gaze landed on Jax again. This time, the amusement in his eyes had soured into something meaner. Damon recognized it for what it was. Some people saw a well-trained dog and respected it. Others saw a challenge. The biker took a step forward. "You always bring your mutt with you." The word sat heavy in the air. Damon's fingers tensed slightly against the handle of his coffee mug, but his face remained unreadable. "He's allowed to be here," Damon said simply. The biker let out a dry chuckle. Yeah, Betty's real useful, huh? Damon said nothing. The biker shifted his weight, glancing at the people around them. Well, you're scared to talk. He grinned, looking for an audience. Damn, this place is quiet. Feels like a funeral in here. No one laughed. Something about that only irritated him more. His attention flicked back to Jax. He took another step closer, his boots stopping just a few feet away from the dog. Damon finally set his coffee down. Slow, controlled. Jax didn't move. But Damon could see the tension in his posture. He knew his dog knew the way his muscles tightened just before a lunge, the way his breathing changed when he was waiting for a command. Careful. Damon said, his voice calm but firm. He doesn't like people in his space. The biker scuffed that. Right then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he raised his boot and kicked Jax hard. The impact sent a jolt through the dog's body. Jax yelped, stumbling back before regaining his stance, his eyes locking onto the man with razor-sharp focus. A collective gasp rippled through the cafe chairs, scraped against the floor as people shifted, uncertain whether they should intervene or stay out of it. The biker chuckled, shaking his head like it was all just a joke. Shouldn't let him lay around like that, he muttered. Damon wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at Jax. The dog wasn't whimpering, wasn't cowering. He was waiting. Waiting for Damon to say something. Waiting for permission. Damon exhaled slowly, a deep, controlled breath. Then, without looking away from Jax, he spoke. You got about 5 seconds to apologize. The biker snorted, or what? Damon finally looked up, and for the first time the biker saw it. The shift. The stillness that wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. The calm that didn't mean surrender, but control. A flicker of something passed through the biker's eyes. Confusion, uncertainty. But it was too late for that now, because this was the moment he realized he just made the worst mistake of his day. Wyatt Grayson had spent most of his life getting away with things. His size, his attitude, the way he carried himself. Most people weren't willing to push back. He was used to seeing fear in people's eyes, the way they shifted uncomfortably, the way they chose silence over confrontation. But Damon wasn't shifting, wasn't flinching. And that was the first sign that things weren't going to play out the way Wyatt expected. The second was Jax. The dog hadn't moved an inch. But his eyes told a different story. Alert, focused, the kind of look Wyatt had seen in guard dogs trained to rip a man apart with a single command. Wyatt scoffed, rolling his shoulders like he was shaking something off. You serious? He asked, tilting his head over a dog. Damon's expression didn't change. He just rested his hands flat on the table, fingers spread, relaxed. 5 seconds, he repeated, voice calm. That's all you get. Wyatt chuckled dryly, glancing at the others in the cafe. You all hear this man's giving me a damn countdown. Nobody laughed. Nobody said a word. That's when Wyatt started to feel it. Not fear, not yet, but something was off. His usual tricks weren't working. Damon wasn't reacting the way most men did. Wasn't puffing out his chest. Wasn't raising his voice. Wasn't throwing empty threats. And that silence, that lack of fear, it was worse than being yelled at. Wyatt's jaw tightened. What, you think you're some kind of badass? Damon didn't answer 4 seconds. Wyatt let out a slow breath, cracking his knuckles. I don't apologize, he said, his voice dropping lower. Damon still didn't move, didn't blink. 3 seconds. A bead of sweat rolled down the back of Wyatt's neck. He could feel something shifting in the room. Not just with Damon, with everyone. The barista, the old couple by the window, the guy pretending to read a book. All of them were waiting for something like they already knew how this was going to end. 2 seconds, Wyatt's fingers curled into fists. You don't know who you're messing with, he muttered, stepping forward 1 second. Damon sighed. Then he stood up. It was a slow, deliberate movement. Nothing flashy, nothing rushed. But somehow when he straightened to his full height, the air in the cafe changed. Wyatt wasn't small, wasn't weak. But suddenly, for the first time in a long time, he felt small. Damon's gaze locked onto his calm, steady, unwavering. And in that moment, Wyatt understood he had miscalculated badly. You were saying? Damon asked, voice smooth as glass. Wyatt's throat felt tight. His mouth went dry, but he couldn't back down now. not in front of everyone. So he did what he always did. He swung first, and that's when everything went to hell. Because Wyatt had no idea who he was swinging at. Wyatt's fist cut through the air, aimed straight at Damon's jaw. It was a strong punch, one that had put men on the ground before. But Damon wasn't most men with a slight pivot. He shifted his weight, dodging the strike with practice ease. Wyatt's knuckles barely brushed past his face before Damon's hand shot up, catching the biker's wrist in a firm grip. And that's when Wyatt realized he was in trouble. Damon twisted Wyatt's arm just enough to make him stumble forward, his balance thrown off completely before he could react. Damon's other hand pressed against his shoulder, guiding him downward with controlled force. Wyatt's knee hit the floor with a dull thud. The cafe was dead silent. No one moved, no one spoke. Jack stood beside Damon, completely still, watching, waiting. Wyatt gritted his teeth, struggling to yank his arm free. Wyatt gritted his teeth, struggling to yank his arm free. But Damon's grip was unshakable, firm, controlled, but not excessive. He wasn't trying to break anything. Not yet. You're strong, Damon said quietly. But strength without control. He let that hang in the air for a second before continuing. That's just a wrecking ball waiting to crash into the wrong wall. Wyatt let out a frustrated grunt, twisting again. But Damon didn't budge. You don't want to do this, Damon continued. His voice was level, steady, not a warning. A fact. Wyatt's breathing was heavy now, chest rising and falling. His face was turning red, not just from exertion, but from the humiliation. The man who had walked in expecting to intimidate everyone was now kneeling on the ground, pinned by someone who hadn't even broken a sweat. Damon released his grip, wired, yanked his arm back, and stood quickly, rubbing his wrist as if he had just touched fire. He took a step back, then another. His eyes darted around the cafe, looking for what support, a way out of this. Without losing face, no one moved. No one was on his side. And the worst part, Damon wasn't even looking at him anymore. He was reaching down, scratching Jack's behind the ears, as if Wyatt wasn't even worth his attention. That stung more than the takedown. Wyatt swallowed hard, his hands still clenched into fists. His mind screamed at him to do something, to throw another punch, to take back control of the situation. But something deeper, something primal told him he had already lost. Damon finally looked up, his expression unreadable. That was your free pass, he said. Wyatt hesitated. What? Damon took a step closer. Not aggressive, not threatening, just a presence. I don't know what kind of life you've lived, but I do know this. Damon said, you walk around looking for fights. One day you'll find one you can't win. Wyatt's jaw tensed. He didn't respond. Damon didn't expect him to. Next time you think about hurting something weaker than you. Damon's voice lowered just slightly, just enough to make Wyatt's stomach not remember this moment. Wyatt opened his mouth, then shut it again. There was nothing to say. He turned abruptly and stormed out of the cafe, his heavy boots echoing against the tile. The door swung shut behind him with a final clunk. Silence followed, then slowly, the cafe started breathing again. Chairs shifted. A few quiet murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone behind the counter let out a shaky breath. Damon sat back down, picked up his coffee, took a slow sip. Jack, sensing the moment was over, curled up at his feet again. And just like that, everything was normal, except it wasn't, because Wyatt Grayson had just learned a lesson he wouldn't forget. Wyatt stepped out of the cafe, but his mind was still inside his chest, heaved, his pulse hammering in his ears. The sun felt too hot, the air too thick. He had never been handled like that before. People had always backed down, always looked away, always let him be the biggest presence in the room. But Damon Mercer. Damon had barely lifted a finger. Wyatt's fists clenched at his sides as he made his way toward his bike. Parked just a few feet away, his hands shook, not from pain, not even from rage. It was something else. Something uncomfortable. Something he didn't want to name. He grabbed his helmet, yanking it over his head with more force than necessary. His fingers hovered over the ignition, but he didn't start the engine. Instead, he stared at his own reflection in the side mirror. The same face he had seen for years, but something was different. He could still feel Damon's grip the way it wasn't about overpowering him, but controlling the situation the way he had taken wired strength and made it meaningless. And Jax the damn dog had been ready, not scared, not panicked, just waiting. Wyatt exhaled sharply and looked over his shoulder through the cafe window. He could still see Damon calm as ever, sipping his coffee, like nothing had happened. Jax curled at his feet, relaxed like it was all routine, like Wyatt hadn't even been a challenge. His stomach twisted. What was he supposed to do with that? He had spent years being the guy. People feared the guy. Nobody messed with. The guy who could walk into a place and own it. But today, he had been dismissed, and that was worse than losing a fight. Wyatt clenched his jaw and turned the key in the ignition. The motorcycle rode to life beneath him. But it didn't feel like it usually did. It didn't drown out the thoughts, didn't silence the questions, didn't erase the way he had been put in his place. With one last glance of the cafe, he pulled out onto the road. He didn't know where he was going, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. Back inside, the air was different. People had moved on, but not really. The tension had settled. Like dust after a storm. A few customers threw Damon glances, grateful, impressed, maybe even a little in awe. He ignored them. He wasn't looking for attention. He reached down and gave Jax a firm scratch behind the ears. The dog sighed contentedly, resting his head on Damon's boot. Good boy. Damon murmured. Jax had felt it before anyone else. And Wyatt had walked in thinking he owned the place. But respect isn't something you take, it's something you earn. The barista hesitated near his table. Damon looked up. She swallowed her fingers nervously, twisting the edge of her apron. She trailed off. Searching for words, Damon just gave her a small nod. It's over. She let out a breath, nodded back and went back to the counter. The truth was, it wasn't over. Not really, because guys like Wyatt, they either learn from moments like this or they let the bitterness fester. Damon had seen it go both ways, but that wasn't his problem. Not anymore. He took another sip of coffee outside. The sun had shifted. The day moved forward like it always did. Jack sighed in his sleep, and Damon let the moment pass, because at the end of the day, some lessons only sink in when the world stops handing out second chances. The hum of the cafe returned to normal. But Damon knew the moment had left its mark. People carried on sipping coffee, scrolling their phones, chatting in hushed voices, but he could feel the glances, the stolen looks of curiosity, maybe even admiration. He ignored them. This wasn't about being a hero. It never was. Jack shifted at his feet, stretching before settling back down. Damon reached down and ran a slow hand over the dog's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Jax had been kicked hard, but he didn't dwell on it. Didn't flinch, didn't hold on to it like a wound. He just moved forward. Damon exhaled slowly, letting the thought settle. Wyatt Grayson, on the other hand, that was a man who had never been put in check before. Never had someone stop him without backing down. Never had anyone deny him power without violence, and that kind of lesson. It either changed you, or it ate you alive. Damon had seen it before, men who carried their bruised egos like open wounds, spending the rest of their lives trying to patch it up the wrong way. But sometimes, a man took a long, hard look in the mirror and saw someone they didn't want to be anymore. The choice was Wyatt. And the thing about choices, they come back around 2 weeks later. Damon didn't think about Wyatt much after that day. The world had a way of moving on, and so did he. But one afternoon, while walking Jax through the park, something made him stop. The familiar sound of an engine. A motorcycle idling. Damon's muscles tensed, instinct kicking in before reason could. He turned his head, eyes scanning the lot, and there he was. Wyatt Grayson sitting on his bike, helmet resting on his knee. His eyes met Damon's, but this time there was no smirk, no bravado, just hesitation. Damon didn't say anything. Didn't have to. Wyatt exhaled, looking down at his hands, his fingers gripping the handlebars like he wasn't sure what to do with them. He swallowed, then shook his head, almost like he was frustrated with himself. Finally, he swung one leg off the bike and stood. His steps weren't heavy this time. No boot stomping. No forced presence. He stopped a few feet away, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, man." He hesitated, then let out of breath. "That day at the cafe, I was an ass." Damon studied him, saying nothing. Wyatt shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. I don't got a good excuse for it." He gestured vaguely at the air as if waving at something unseen. "Been pissed off at the world for a long time. Just never had anyone check me on it before." Damon finally spoke, and now Wyatt let out a bit of chuckle. "I guess I needed it." He kicked at the dirt, shaking his head. "That day messed me up. Couldn't stop thinking about it, was ready to get back at you somehow. Then I looked in the damn mirror," and his voice trailed off. Damon nodded slightly. "And you didn't like what you saw?" Wyatt clenched his jaw but nodded. "Yeah." Silence stretched between them. Jack sat patiently at Damon's side, ears perked but relaxed, watching. Finally, Wyatt sighed. "Anyway, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for the dog for being a piece of crap that day. Just yeah." Damon let the words hang for a moment, then gave a single nod. "All right." Wyatt blinked. "That's it." Damon shrugged. "What else do you want?" Wyatt let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I don't know, a punch to the face. Feels like I got off easy." Damon smirked. "I gave you something better." Wyatt tilted his head. "Yeah, what's that?" Damon's gaze was steady. "A second chance." Wyatt held that for a long time, let it sink in. Then without another word, he turned, walked back to his bike and pulled on his helmet. The engine growled to life, but before he drove off, he lifted a hand, not a wave, but an acknowledgement. And Damon, after a brief pause, gave him a nod in return. Wyatt pulled away, disappearing into the traffic. Damon looked down at Jax, who blinked up at him, tail thumping against the ground. "Guess people can change," he murmured. Jax huffed, as if I'm convinced. Damon chuckled, then continued his walk. "Some people live their whole lives running from the truth, but others, they stop, they face it, and sometimes they actually do something about it." If this story left you thinking, even just for a second, don't forget to subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Maybe someone, needs to hear this lesson too. Because at the end of the day, we all get a second chance, but it's what we do with it that matters.